He stood there smiling as my entire system disappeared from the shared screen. 11 years of architecture gone with one arrogant click. No warning, no backup. Just ego disguised as innovation. I didn't shout, I didn't argue. I walked out and built something smarter. What happened next cost him everything he thought he owned. Stay with me. This one's about quiet revenge, smart power, and what happens when competence gets erased. If you've ever been underestimated, subscribe and tell me your story in the comments. It happened on a Thursday morning, the kind of gray Seattle day that makes everything feel heavier than it should. I was halfway through presenting the new data orchestration roadmap when Ethan Rhodes, our newly hired VP of Engineering, interrupted me mid-sentence. "We're not doing this anymore," he said, his voice smooth and performative, the kind that fills silence, not because it should, but because it can. He stood, walked to the big screen, and without even asking, took control of the display. I stepped back, holding the remote like it still mattered. He opened my repository, the one that held the framework I'd built over 11 years. Our company's data backbone, the system that handled millions of transactions a day, optimized across hybrid clouds, feeding analytics for every enterprise client we had. "This," he said, pointing at my code, "is legacy thinking. We need modernization." He smiled as if this was a TED Talk and not a team meeting. Then he did it. Click delete, just like that. My work, my logic, the foundation of Helios Data Systems, gone. I heard someone gasp behind me. Another engineer coughed just to fill the silence. I didn't move. I just watched the progress bar crawl across the screen. 11 years condensed into seconds of deletion. "We'll rebuild it right this time," he said. "Serverless, event-driven, fully containerized." The buzzwords rolled out of his mouth like currency, polished and meaningless. I could feel 40 pairs of eyes shift toward me, waiting for a reaction, for outrage or collapse. I gave them neither. I just nodded once, quietly closing my laptop. "Then I'll leave you to it," I said, keeping my tone even. He chuckled, not realizing I meant it. He thought it was sarcasm. It wasn't. I walked out of that conference room, past the wall of Helios awards I'd helped earn, past the interns who still used the tools I'd built to train data sets, and I didn't look back. In that moment, something settled in me. Not anger, but clarity. I realized that every system, even human ones, collapses when it forgets the logic that keeps it alive. I'd spent years making sure Helios never failed under load, never lost integrity, never corrupted its data. But people are different. Leadership had corrupted itself long before Ethan pressed delete. I could feel the weight of what was coming for them, not out of revenge, but inevitability. I didn't need to argue my worth to a man who mistook deletion for leadership. I didn't need to stay in a place that confused disruption with progress. I walked straight to my office, packed the small things that still mattered, my mug, my whiteboard sketches, the photo of our first server rack, and shut the lights. As the elevator doors closed, I looked at the Helios logo one last time. It used to stand for precision, resilience, logic. Now it stood for arrogance. I didn't go back. I went in a different direction. Before Ethan arrived, Helios had been a place built on quiet precision. I'd joined in the early years when we were just a handful of engineers building data systems for hospitals and research firms who couldn't afford downtime. Back then, my code wasn't about flashy frameworks or buzzwords. It was about survival. I designed our data orchestration model to handle unpredictable spikes, corrupted inputs, and client datasets so large they could choke an entire cluster. Every success Helios celebrated, the seamless migrations, the 100% uptime streaks, the record contracts, had been routed through systems I designed in silence, while others took the credit. But it didn't bother me much. Building things that worked was its own reward. What changed wasn't me. It was the culture. New executives arrived with bigger words and smaller patience. They didn't want systems that endured. They wanted systems that impressed investors. Ethan was just the loudest symptom of that infection. I remember the first time I heard his name, an ex-startup CTO who brought modern vision. In truth, his last company folded because he'd rebuilt their entire platform on untested serverless architecture that buckled under scale. Helios hired him anyway, because that kind of failure somehow looked bold on paper. When he deleted my work, I didn't see an enemy. I saw inevitability. I'd already been quietly documenting everything: pipelines, data sync intervals, anomaly handling patterns, failover contingencies, not out of paranoia, but out of habit. You don't survive 11 years in production environments without redundancy. Those notes became my foundation for something else. 2 weeks before that meeting, I'd been approached by an engineer from Orion Analytics, a smaller firm I'd mentored years earlier when they were still bootstrapping. They were struggling with scale. Their systems were promising but fragile. "We've read your white paper," their CTO had said. "Would you ever consult?" I turned it down politely at the time. I was loyal to Helios. That loyalty evaporated the moment Ethan turned my code into a prop. So I made a quiet call. The CTO of Orion, Lila Tran, answered immediately. "Debra," she said, her tone both surprised and cautious. "I thought Helios had you locked in forever." "Not anymore," I told her. "And you said you needed help scaling your data pipeline?" We met 2 days later in Haisia, a small cafe tucked behind a co-working space in Pioneer Square. No contracts yet, no titles, just a conversation between two engineers who actually respected what systems could do. Lila wasn't interested in slogans. She wanted stability, scalability, elegance. She wanted exactly what Helios had lost. I shared a few architectural sketches on a napkin, the kind of flow models that handled concurrency at scale without fragmenting transactional integrity. Her eyes widened as I explained how my old design at Helios could be adapted for modular data lakes and predictive analytics. "You built this?" she asked. "Every line," I said. That's when I saw it in her expression. The recognition I hadn't seen at Helios in years. I didn't join Orion for revenge. I joined because someone finally listened. But deep down, I knew where this path led. Helios had built its reputation on systems I created. If Orion evolved past that architecture, they'd become what Helios feared most, a true competitor with technical credibility. Lila offered me the role of chief systems architect. "You'll have full control," she said. "No corporate noise, no vanity projects." I said yes, quietly, without drama. I didn't even tell my old team. I just started working nights from my apartment, translating years of experience into blueprints for something faster, smarter, more resilient. For the first time in months, I felt alive again. I wasn't just rebuilding code, I was rewriting my own narrative. Helios thought they'd deleted me. They'd only deleted their future. Working with Orion felt like rewinding time to when engineering still meant creation, not politics. We were a small team, 6 senior engineers, 3 data scientists, and 1 CTO who actually wrote code. No committees, no presentations for investors every Friday. No executives weighing down every decision with buzzwords. Lila gave me a clean slate, and for the first time in years, I could design without explaining myself to people who didn't understand what stability meant. I started by mapping out the architecture for what would become Orion's new data engine, a modular orchestration system capable of handling terabyte-scale ingestion without breaking transactional integrity. At Helios, that architecture had taken me years to stabilize because leadership never allowed full modernization. Now I could rebuild it properly. I named the new model AstraFlow, not for ego, but for clarity. It was the kind of design built to endure turbulence. I didn't copy a single line of code from Helios, but I didn't need to. The real system wasn't in their repositories. It was in my head, in every decision I'd made under pressure, every anomaly I'd resolved at 2 a.m. while others slept. Lila trusted me completely. "You're the architect," she said. "Just tell us what you need." What I needed was trust, and Orion gave it to me in full. Within months, we'd deployed the first version of AstraFlow across 3 pilot clients. Their processing times dropped by 40%. Data accuracy rose by 20%. Our logs showed 0 system downtime in 6 months. The results started spreading quietly through the industry. People began whispering that Orion's platform felt different. No one knew why yet, and I didn't care to explain. I didn't advertise my new role, didn't post it online, didn't update my LinkedIn. I wanted the work to speak first. Ethan, meanwhile, was making headlines of another kind, announcing Project Phoenix, a full rebuild of Helios's infrastructure. The press releases were shiny, but engineers in the industry could see the cracks. I read every line of his interviews like a forensic scientist studying evidence. He talked about scalability, microservices, and AI-driven optimization, but not once did he mention data integrity or failover logic. He was rebuilding the skeleton without the heart. I watched quietly as Helios spent millions migrating clients to a new architecture that wasn't ready for production. At Orion, our clients multiplied. Small contracts turned into multi-year partnerships. I started mentoring younger engineers, teaching them what Helios had forgotten, that resilience is designed, not announced. Some nights, I caught myself thinking about the team I left behind, the engineers who'd whispered apologies as Ethan deleted my work. I didn't blame them. I understood what fear of leadership looks like. But it fueled me. Every line of AstraFlow was a counterpoint to the arrogance I'd witnessed. I embedded adaptive recovery protocols, automated health checks, and real-time rollback features, things Ethan never let me implement because they slowed innovation. Innovation to him meant velocity at the expense of sanity. To me, it meant longevity without fragility. The day we rolled out AstraFlow 2.0, Lila stood beside me as the dashboards lit up in green. "You realize what we've built here?" she said quietly. "We've built what they always wanted to, but never understood." I smiled. "We've built what they feared." The irony was sharp and satisfying. Within the next quarter, Orion secured a shortlist spot for a federal data modernization contract, one that Helios had been grooming for 2 years. I didn't celebrate, not yet. I'd learned from experience that victory is quieter when it's earned. Instead, I spent the night reviewing our system logs, running stress tests, tightening redundancies. Helios's architecture would buckle under real-world load. Mine wouldn't. This wasn't revenge. It was precision. I didn't leak my involvement, didn't boast to anyone from my old network. But when Orion's reliability reports began circulating through industry channels, I knew Helios's leadership was reading them too. They wouldn't say it out loud, but I could imagine Ethan's reaction, the tightening jaw, the forced smile during investor calls. He had no idea who was building the system that was about to eclipse him. That's the thing about quiet builders. We don't need recognition to win. We just need time. The first time I saw Helios's name appear across from ours on the federal contract bid sheet, my pulse barely moved. I'd expected it. Orion had grown from a whisper in the analytics world to a serious contender, and this deal, the National Infrastructure Data Consortium, was the one everyone in the industry wanted. It wasn't just money, it was prestige, the kind that defines reputations for a decade. I knew exactly how Helios would pitch it. Ethan would lean on brand recognition, promise innovation through his Phoenix architecture, and throw around every modern term he could memorize from conferences. What he wouldn't do was show working stability metrics because he didn't have any. The bid presentation was set for mid-March, downtown D.C., in a neutral government tech facility that smelled of recycled ambition and too much coffee. Lila insisted I attend the pitch in person. "You built the system," she said. "You deserve to see it stand on its own." I didn't argue. When we arrived, I kept my badge turned backward, letting Lila handle introductions. She spoke confidently, effortlessly, the way only someone who understood her engineers could. I sat 2 seats behind, scanning the Helios table across the room. Ethan was there, all polished confidence and forced charisma, surrounded by a dozen executives in identical Navy suits. He didn't notice me at first. The presentations began with Helios. As expected, Ethan dazzled the room with polished slides and AI-rendered diagrams showing an infinitely scalable platform capable of real-time data orchestration across multiple agencies. It was beautiful theater. His voice carried the rhythm of someone rehearsed to sound certain. But every time he said, "real-time synchronization," I heard the ghost of the system I'd built. The one that actually worked under load, the one he'd deleted. When the judges asked about resilience under concurrent stress events, Ethan smiled and said, "We've completely rebuilt from first principles. Legacy systems can't evolve fast enough for modern demand." I almost laughed. Legacy systems, I thought, as in the one that never failed? But I said nothing. Lila went next. She didn't open with vision statements. She opened with metrics. Uptime, error correction speed, anomaly recovery cycles, numbers that mattered. Then she handed control to me without warning. "Debra Cole, our chief systems architect," she said, as if announcing someone they'd all heard of. Ethan's eyes lifted for the first time. His expression froze when he saw me. For a moment, the room disappeared. Just him, me, and the history he thought he'd erased. I walked to the front, calm, steady, the same way I'd walked out of his conference room months before. AstraFlow, I began, was designed for one purpose: to process massive, unpredictable datasets with zero compromise in accuracy or security. We don't rebuild for attention. We refine for longevity. I could feel the evaluators leaning forward, the room tightening around my words. I showed them real system logs, stress simulations, disaster recovery metrics. Every number we presented had a timestamp, a validation signature, proof of performance. I didn't mention Helios once, but every metric screamed comparison. When I finished, the room was silent for 3 seconds, long enough to feel the shift. One of the evaluators spoke first. "You're saying this is live?" "As of 5 minutes ago," I said. "These are production metrics." Lila smiled. Ethan shifted in his seat. The judges didn't even need deliberation. Orion won the bid within the week. The announcement hit every major tech outlet the next morning. Orion Analytics secures $220 million federal contract for data infrastructure modernization. Helios's investors demanded explanations. Ethan's public statement was polite, almost rehearsed. "We applaud the consortium's choice and remain committed to innovation." Privately, he knew what it meant. A week later, I received an email from a former Helios engineer, one of the few who'd defended me quietly back then. It contained a single sentence. He finally realized who was behind AstraFlow. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The best revenge doesn't arrive with noise. It arrives with contracts signed under your name, while your rivals scramble for excuses. In the months that followed, Orion's growth exploded. Our client base tripled. The federal partnership became a case study in scalable data integrity. And Helios? Their clients started migrating one by one, citing reliability concerns. Ethan resigned quietly by summer, his Phoenix system still unfinished, smoldering under the weight of its own promises. I watched from a distance as their press releases shrank from visionary to defensive, from modernization leader to undergoing restructuring. When people asked how it felt seeing them fall, I told the truth. I felt nothing but validation. The system worked. The silence worked. They'd burned their foundation. I just built something stronger from the ashes. The calls started the day after the announcement. Unknown numbers, office lines I still recognized, even personal extensions I'd memorized from years of late-night troubleshooting. At first, I ignored them out of instinct. But when one of the messages began with, "Debra, it's Ethan," I pressed play just once, just to hear the tone. Gone was the arrogance, the polished certainty. He sounded tired, brittle, rehearsed in humility. "We need to talk," he said. "There's been fallout. Clients are questioning system stability, and the board wants to discuss potential reinstatement. Reinstatement. That word hit like irony sharpened to a blade. I deleted the voicemail and went back to work. By that afternoon, the outreach shifted from pleading to desperate. Emails from HR, from Helios's COO, even from the board chair, each written with surgical politeness but bleeding panic between the lines. They offered titles, Chief Technical Officer. They offered money, double my previous salary, signing bonus, stock options. They promised creative freedom, recognition, a chance to redefine the next era of Helios innovation. I didn't respond to a single one. What none of them understood was that this was never about revenge or recognition. It was about respect. And once that's gone, no contract can resurrect it. They wanted me back because the system I designed had started failing in ways they couldn't predict. The architecture Ethan had patched together for Project Phoenix had entered what engineers call the failure cascade, one component failing silently until the entire structure collapses without warning. Their dashboards showed anomalies they couldn't trace. Their clients were reporting data corruption and sync failures. They were, in every sense, living inside the disaster I'd once spent years protecting them from. A few former teammates messaged me privately, some apologetic, some simply relieved to see I was thriving. One of them, Ryan, wrote, "They're lost without you. He's lost." I typed a reply, then deleted it. Some messages don't need to be sent. Late that evening, my phone lit up again. This time, I recognized the number. It was Ethan's direct line. I watched it ring until it stopped, leaving the silence I preferred. The truth was, I'd already moved past him, past Helios, past the version of myself who tolerated being dismissed to prove a point. Revenge wasn't in the calls they made. It was in my refusal to answer them. When you've rebuilt your life, hearing your old boss beg isn't satisfaction. It's proof that you made the right exit. That night, I logged into my LinkedIn account for the first time in months. My notifications were full. Recruiters, journalists, engineers sending congratulations. I opened the privacy settings, scrolled to profile visibility, and switched it to private. Not to hide, but to end the conversation entirely. Let them wonder where I'd gone, what I was building next. Some silences speak louder than announcements. I shut the laptop, took a deep breath, and let Helios fade into memory. They'd made their choice. I'd made mine. In the months that followed, Helios unraveled quietly, like a machine running on memory but not logic. Their systems crashed 3 times in a single quarter, each failure costing millions in lost contracts. Clients fled faster than the PR team could spin statements about temporary integration challenges. The tech press framed it as a leadership transition crisis, but those of us who'd built things for a living knew better. You can't delete your foundation and expect the structure to stand. Meanwhile, at Orion, the opposite happened. Every week brought another contract, another migration from a company that once swore allegiance to Helios. We didn't have to advertise. Their failures did it for us. I found myself leading a growing team of engineers who actually understood the meaning of stability, not as a buzzword, but as responsibility. The work was demanding, exhausting, exhilarating, but it felt clean, honest, and purposeful in a way it hadn't for years. Sometimes I'd see headlines about Helios's ongoing issues or another executive resignation. I never clicked the links. There's no satisfaction in watching a building collapse when you already walked out before the cracks showed. I'd learned that revenge isn't about watching someone fail. It's about succeeding so completely they can't follow you anymore. One afternoon, Lila called me into her office. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked, meaning Helios, the legacy, the years I'd poured into keeping it alive. I thought about it for a moment before shaking my head. "No," I said. "I used to believe I had to fix everything I built. Now I understand that sometimes you outgrow the things you save." She nodded, and we went back to work. It wasn't until much later that I realized how true that was. Helios had been my education. Orion was my evolution. They taught me what happens when ego replaces understanding. Orion taught me what happens when competence is trusted. I didn't destroy Helios. They did that themselves when they erased the one person who could have saved them. All I did was move forward, building systems that worked, teams that listened, and a life that no longer revolved around proving my worth to anyone. That's not vengeance. That's growth. A year later, I found myself standing at a technology summit in San Francisco, surrounded by people who used to work for the very companies that once dismissed engineers like me. I just finished giving a keynote on system resilience when a young developer approached, notebook clutched to her chest. "How do you know when it's time to walk away?" she asked. Her voice trembled, like she already knew the answer but needed permission to say it out loud. I smiled because I recognized her expression, the mixture of loyalty and exhaustion. "When you realize they stopped listening," I told her, "that's when you start building somewhere that does." She nodded slowly, as if she'd been waiting to hear that exact sentence. Later that night, I went back to my hotel room, opened my laptop, and saw a new headline trending in the tech news feed. Helios Data Systems acquired by Orion Analytics in strategic asset integration. I read it twice, not out of disbelief, but quiet awe at how naturally the story had come full circle. They weren't destroyed. They were absorbed, transformed into part of something that worked. There was no bitterness, no triumph, just the strange satisfaction of symmetry. The code I'd once written for survival had evolved into the architecture that rebuilt an entire industry. I closed the laptop, letting the glow fade, and looked out over the city lights. Somewhere below, another engineer was probably being told she was replaceable, that her ideas were outdated. Maybe one day she'd build her own Orion too. That's the real echo effect, not revenge, not collapse, but the ripple that happens when one person decides to build instead of break. I turned off the light, thinking of all the systems still running on code I once wrote, and smiled. Looking back, what stayed with me wasn't the collapse of Helios or the headlines that followed. It was the quiet truth that sometimes walking away is the loudest statement you can make. I spent years believing loyalty meant endurance, that if I just worked harder, people would eventually see my worth. But the real lesson was this: competence doesn't need validation, and silence, when chosen deliberately, can be the sharpest form of justice. I didn't ruin Ethan or Helios. I simply refused to participate in their chaos. And when I stopped defending my place there, life made room for something better. Revenge, when stripped of anger, becomes something else. It becomes direction. You don't have to destroy those who wronged you. You just have to outgrow them so thoroughly that they can't follow. Sometimes forgiveness is self-liberation, but sometimes silence is the sharper knife. Both are choices that define who you become after the damage is done. In a world obsessed with confrontation and instant retribution, patience can still be power. In your own life, that means understanding when to fight and when to leave, when to prove your point, and when to let results do it for you. How to get started today. Document your work. Clarity protects you when recognition doesn't. Start one small project that's entirely yours. Independence is the foundation of resilience. Detach from people who mistake volume for vision. Quiet focus will always outlast noise. Remember that peace is not weakness. It's the energy you save for the right opportunities. We all face versions of Helios in our lives, places or people that try to erase what we've built. The question isn't whether they'll regret it. It's whether you'll move forward fast enough to make their regret irrelevant. Comment your thoughts, share your story, and subscribe for more.